2016 was a record-setting year for the climate, setting a global heat record for the third year in a row. Now, that means that 16 of the 17 hottest years on record have occurred since the year 2000. Now, to help me break this down, let's bring in Paul Bledsoe, president of Bledsoe and Associates. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hi, Rachelle.
So let's start with the global look. Let's start with which parts of the world are the most impacted economically by climate change?
Well, really, climate change impacts are happening everywhere around the world. For example, in the United States, there was severe flooding in Louisiana that was made twice as likely due to climate change. That one weather event cost the taxpayers of the United States $15 billion. So we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of costs every year, and we don't really even know all of them. This is the proverbial tip of the iceberg. This is why so many governments and businesses are deeply concerned about climate change. And I think we're going to see President Xi, Prime Minister Modi, and tomorrow here in Washington, Prime Minister May talk to President Trump about this and explain to him that this is an issue of dollars and cents, and it's costing us a lot already.
Now, it's definitely costing some countries more than others. There are some areas that are just more susceptible to some of the damage from climate change. Are there any specific countries you think are really bearing the brunt of it?
So let's take a couple of issues. Let's take the sea level rise that's caused by climate change. Florida is very vulnerable, so the United States and the Gulf Coast, but so is China along the China Sea. Countries throughout the world are very vulnerable, so it's spread around in different types of effects. Let's take freshwater supply. China has historically had problems with freshwater supply, including for agriculture, as has India. Those are really big stresses that are put on the climatic system when temperatures get hotter. So these are very fundamental problems that can increase costs to societies across the board.
Now, you mentioned agriculture. Let's look at the impact there. Which are the crops that are really most at risk, especially as we're preparing to feed a growing global population?
So it turns out that higher temperatures are going to put more stress on big yields, right? For the last 50 years, the good news has been we're producing more maize, more grain, more soybeans per acre than ever before. That progress is about to be stopped by climate change because extreme heat can kill large percentage of crop. You add to that fresh water supply shortages, and we could envision serious problems. You know, in Syria, one of the reasons most believe that Syrian society started to break down was an extreme drought in the last decade that began to stress the society and cause all sorts of problems. These are the kinds of things global leaders are worried about.
And that's one of the things people really don't think about when they think about how these crises can really escalate. And why is it then, when we have these very immediate weather events, those people really pay attention to, but when you hear things about the temperature going up 1 or 2 degrees, it's harder for people to really wrap their head around it. What sort of impact could we be looking at?
So let's take again the United States. The incidence of wildfire in the United States has doubled over the last 40 years. We're talking about acreage the size of the states of Massachusetts and Connecticut combined, 16,000 square miles burned every year more than used to be. The Forest Service in the United States used to spend 15% of its budget. Today it spends 60% of its budget just fighting fires. These are huge costs that are happening all around the world. And I've got news for you. They're going to get worse before they get better, especially unless we take dramatic action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and get a hold of global temperatures.
Now, Paul, we mentioned agriculture earlier, but in terms of the broader impact, other perhaps industries that could be affected, what are the real standouts for you?
So to my mind, it's any industry where that has people working outside. Extreme heat is going to reduce labor productivity. That's been proven in study after study. It also affects anything that uses water as a resource, and many, many businesses do rely on water. And then it also affects any business where the general nature of the business is to attract people to recreation. So there are huge swaths of the economy that are affected here.
Now, Paul, we know that we have China really taking this leadership role when it comes to climate change, but you also have skeptics out there, including US President Donald Trump, who say either it doesn't exist, or it's not as bad as people say, or it's not because of human beings. Issues like this require funding and a global effort. How do you find a middle ground with skeptics?
I think business people around the world know the truth. They are voting with their dollars and in their investments, and they are putting their money into cleaner sources of energy. But it's not happening fast enough. We do need government action to help. I really do believe that people like President Xi and Prime Minister May are going to talk some sense to Donald Trump and let him know this is not a sideshow issue. This is central to our economic and our security future.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you. Always good having you. Paul Bledsoe from Bledsoe and Associates.